Коллеги,
Dear
друзья,
colleagues, friends,
дамы и господа,
ladies and gentlemen,
я приветствую
I welcome
участников
participants
и
and
гостей
guests
6-го
of the 6th
международного форума
International Forum,
«Арктика.
Arctic
Территория
Territory of
диалога».
Dialogue.
Его впервые
For the first time, it
принимает
is
Мурманск,
hosted by Murmansk,
столица
the capital of the Russian
Арктики,
Arctic,
город-герой,
a hero
который
city
сегодня
that today is on
динамично
a fast development
развивается.
track.
Как и другие наши
Just like
северные
other
города,
our
субъекты
northern
Федерации
cities and constituents of the
запускают
Russian
знаковые
Federation,
для
it
всей страны
launches
проекты.
projects that are momentous for the
Россия
entire country.
— это
Russia is the
крупнейшая
largest
арктическая
Arctic
держава.
country.
Мы
We have always
выступали и
been
выступаем сегодня
for
за равноправное
equal
сотрудничество
cooperation
в
in
регионе,
the region,
включая
including
научные
scientific
исследования,
research,
защиту
biodiversity
биоразнообразия,
conservation,
вопросы климата,
climate,
реагирование на
emergency
чрезвычайные
response,
ситуации и,
and
конечно,
obviously
экономическое,
economic and
промышленное
industrial
освоение
development
Арктики.
of the Arctic.
Причем мы готовы
We are
к
ready
совместной работе не
for
только
joint work not
с
just with
арктическими
the Arctic
государствами,
states,
но со
but
всеми,
with
кто,
anybody who,
так же как и мы,
just like
разделяет
ourselves, share
ответственность за
responsibility for
стабильное,
stable and
устойчивое
sustainable
будущее
future
планеты,
of our
способен
planet, who is
принимать
able to take
сбалансированные
balanced
решения,
decisions that look
рассчитанные
ahead
на
for
десятилетия вперед.
decades.
К сожалению, сейчас
Regretfully now,
международное
international
взаимодействие
cooperation
в северных
in
широтах
northern
переживает
latitudes
не
experiences
лучшие
not the
времена.
best of times.
годы
In the previous
многие
years, many Western
западные
countries
государства взяли курс на
started to head for a confrontation.
оборвали
They
экономические
severed
связи с
economic
Россией,
links with Russia.
прекратили
They seized
научно-образовательные
scientific,
и
educational,
культурные
and
контакты.
cultural contacts.
Свернут диалог
The
по
dialogue on
сохранению
maintaining
экосистем
ecosystems of the Arctic shut
То
down.
есть
In other words,
политики,
politicians,
партийные
party
деятели,
officials,
те же
including
определенные в некоторых
the
западных
members of the
странах
Green
говорят
parties in
своим
some
гражданам,
countries tell their citizens,
о
their
важности климатической повестки, об охране
voters on
природы,
the importance of maintaining the climate agenda and nature conservation, but in reality, they act differently. Let me remind you that for cooperation in the environmental field to prevent emergencies of the polar circle and joint response, the Arctic Council was set up. But this mechanism has also got degraded today, and mind you, Russia never refused to interact in this format. That was the choice of our Western partners, Western states. As they say in such cases, if you don't want to, so be it. We'll work with those who want to. However, it's obvious that the role and significance of the Arctic, both for Russia and for the entire world, are growing. But the same is true for geopolitical competition, unfortunately, the struggle for positions in this region. Suffice it to say, and everybody knows about it very well, suffice it to say that the United States plans to support the accession of Greenland. It's only at first glance, it might be a surprise for anybody, and it would be a great mistake to believe that these are just some eccentric talk of new American administration. Nothing of the kind. In fact, such plans were obvious back in 1860s. Back then, the U.S. administration considered the possibility of annexation of Greenland and Iceland, but this idea was not supported by Congress at that time. Let me remind you that by 1869, the American papers laughed at the purchase of Alaska. The deal was called a folly. Alaska was called an icebox. And polar bears garden of Andrew Johnson, the U.S. president at the time. So the suggestion to incorporate Greenland failed at the time, but now the purchase of Alaska obviously is looked at the U.S. quite differently, just like the deeds of Andrew Johnson. So it is nothing surprising about what's happening now. especially since the story only started back then, but it continued later on. In 1910, a tripartite swap transaction was put together, bringing together the United States, Germany, and Denmark. The Greenland would go to the United States, but the transaction failed at the time. During the Second World War, the United States deployed military bases in Greenland to protect its from Nazis, prevent its capture by Nazis. But after the end of the war, the U.S. suggested to buy the island from Denmark, and just recently, judging by international history. So we're talking major plans, serious plans of the U.S. with respect to Greenland. And as I just mentioned, those plans have deep historic roots, and it is obvious that the United States will continue to promote their geopolitical, military, and economic interests in the Arctic. As to Greenland, I think this is an issue that concerns two states and has nothing to do with us. However, we are concerned with the fact that the NATO countries increasingly identify the far north as a foothold for possible conflicts. They do military exercises in these conditions, primarily using the forces of their new recruits, Finland and Sweden, and up to recently we've had no issues with them. So somehow they create these with their own hands. Why? No idea. Nonetheless, we'll be guided by the actual situation. We'll respond to this. Let me stress, Russia has never threatened anybody in the Arctic, but we are watching very closely the recent developments. We develop our response capabilities by enhancing our combat capabilities and upgrading military infrastructure. We will not allow any encroachment of the sovereignty of our country. We will simply protect our national interests. By maintaining peace and stability in the polar region, we will ensure long-term socio-economic development of the region and improvement of the standards of living of people living here and preservation of the unique environment. The stronger our positions, the greater the results, the more opportunities we'll have to launch global international projects in the Arctic with the participation of friendly countries. Friendly states, and possibly Western countries, if, of course, they demonstrate interest to joint work. I'm confident that the time for such projects will definitely come. Dear friends, the Arctic zone is responsible for about 1/4 of the Russian territory. Here, more than 2 million our citizens live and work, and they made a major contribution to our advancement. According to estimates, the Arctic is responsible for 7% of the GDP of Russia and about 11% of our exports. And we see that the prospects are indeed tremendous, the prospects for future comprehensive development of the region. A major area is strengthening the transport and logistical framework of the Arctic. I'd like to stress that this year we celebrate 500 years since the first mentioning in the historic sources of a audacious idea of Russian seafarers and fishermen about a possible trade route along the northern seas to the east to China, along the so-called North-Eastern Passage, a prototype of today's Northern Sea route. Over the past 10 years, the cargo traffic on the Northern Sea route from the Kara gates to the Bering Strait has increased by an order of magnitude. In 2014, only 4 million tons of cargo were brought along this route. Just recently, in 2014, okay? 4 million tons. Last year, almost 38 million tons. It's 5 times the record set back in the Soviet times. We think In fact, we are confident that by 2030, we will have some 70 to 100 million tons. But our plans, both in terms of volume and geography of cargo traffic, on building up our Arctic fleet are much bolder. The Northern Sea Route should become a key section of the Trans-Arctic Transport Corridor, going from St. Petersburg via Murmansk to Vladivostok. It is to connect the global industrial, agricultural, energy centers and consumer markets, offering a shorter, safer, and more cost-effective route. This is what is being said everywhere in the East and the West, and the experts understand it very well. The cargo available for transport in the Trans-Arctic Corridor will grow thanks to the development and processing of resources in the Arctic, thanks to the international transit. And I want to stress that this will be thanks to the connection of the Trans-Arctic Corridor with our domestic rail network from the northwest to the Far East, Baikal-Amur Railroad and Trans-Siberian Railroad. In fact, the very idea on building the Trans-Siberian Railroad across the country to the Pacific Ocean is an example of strategic vision for the future, when we consider not just the current needs and the circumstances, but also interests of the country for centuries to come. That's exactly the approach we should be guided by when developing our Trans-Arctic Corridor. What objectives and goals are of priority here? First, already now, Russia possesses the most numerous icebreaker fleet in the world. And we need to strengthen these positions. We are to commission icebreakers of the next generation, including nuclear-powered icebreakers, and only our country possesses such icebreakers. Nobody else in the world has such a fleet. 4 of those are of the newest series, 22-22-0, and they already are operated in the Arctic. 3 more are under construction, Chukotka, Leningrad, and Stalingrad, and also a super icebreaker with the capacity of 120 megawatts called Russia that would ensure more effective escort of large capacity vessels in high latitudes across the year, all around the year. Now, let me stress that the cost of icebreaker escort and overall cost of cargo transport on Trans-Arctic Corridor should be competitive and acceptable for the market. This is a key condition to ensure the use of the route and its attractiveness for business. Together with colleagues from the government, we discussed these issues, and I have to agree that this work should be market-based. Second, Russia, as a sovereign country, needs its own merchant marine in the Arctic, including cargo and the search and rescue vessels that would ensure transport both across the northern seas and also in internal waterways in the Arctic regions. I have to admit that only local capacities are insufficient. And in this connection, we have to work in all directions. We have to order and procure vessels that have been built. We have to establish cooperation with global manufacturers and overall build up our shipbuilding industry guided by our strategic objectives. Of course, first of all, and I want to bring the attention of the government to this, we need to support our shipbuilding and ship repair enterprises to upgrade their capacities and expand their production and building international production lines. I also asked the government to think of building new shipyards in Russia, modern, sophisticated, high-tech industries. Third, Russian shipping companies have been successfully operating in the northern seas. They carry petroleum products and LNG. Now we have to create conditions to support the growth of effective local operators that would transport containers, coal and other cargoes across the Arctic. We're open to joint ventures. International logistic operators could make profitable investments in such companies, not just with their capital and technologies, but also with some of the fleet of their commercial vessels. Fourth, we will speed up our efforts in order to expand the capacity of our northern ports. We will be using state-of-the-art green solutions, including unmanned and automated cargo handling technologies. The capacity of the Murmansk transport hub, thanks to the advent of new terminals and expansion of rail approaches, in the near future should triple, at least triple. I'd like to add that interest to this project and the overall development of the transport infrastructure in the Arctic is demonstrated by our partners from Belarus, China, and United Arab Emirates and other countries. It is a most interesting endeavor from the business standpoint. Now, we intend to set up major multimodal hubs as logistical centers in the Trans-Arctic corridor. Not only we will ship convoys here, but we will have industrial sites to come up with industrial products. To enhance logistical sustainability of the Trans-Arctic corridor, I would like to ask the government to set up plans in order to expand the capacity of the existing seaports in the Arctic and to think of where on the Arctic coast we have to build new ports and what kind of pace we should take in order to develop the adjacent infrastructure. Primarily, I mean, linking up our sea harbors with the railroad network. In this connection, fifth, just like with the Eastern Polygon, which includes the Baikal-Amur Railroad and Trans-Siberian Railroad, we have to develop the Arctic polygon of railroads, including the upgrade of the Northern Railroad in Komi and Yamalo-Nenets autonomous districts. We're aware of the current situation with the Russian railroads development. We know what kind of challenges the company is facing. It's all well known, but thinking about the development of this railroad, we need already now what kind of opportunities this would provide. The regions of Siberia, Urals, and west of Russia will get a direct access to the north, to the Arctic ports, which would allow to relieve the Trans-Siberian Rail and effectively use maritime transport. Besides, the new points of entry to the Arctic will be provided for the north-south corridor that connects us with the Central Asian countries and the Persian Gulf states. And of course, for the development of the Trans-Arctic route, we need to unlock the potential of internal waterways in the Arctic, our great rivers, the Lena, the Yenisei, and the Ob. Among other things, it would help strengthen the system of supply of goods to the northern territories, so that residents of the Arctic are securely provided with food and other goods. To implement these and other major initiatives, we have to pool the resources of the government, regions, and the business community, including the banks, both with the government participation and the private banks. We need to lean on the local securities market to bring in capital into the Arctic infrastructure. Well, of course, infrastructure projects are complex and costly, and they take a long time to pay back. But it is these projects that at the new level ensure the true transportation sovereignty of Russia. And I'm confident that if our foreign partners participate in those projects, this would guarantee investment for a long term with good returns for them. Therefore, it is impossible. We should not put off these projects. They should be launched and implemented now, as soon as possible. Well, obviously, we need to be flexible. We need to make these projects interesting for both Russian and foreign investors. In this connection, I suggest that we should think a special project office under the auspices of our leading development institutions, VEB. The project office will provide support to transport, logistics, infrastructure projects in the Arctic and the projects of urban development in the region. The project office will serve as a structure where a potential investor could turn directly and obtain all the necessary support. I ask the government to come up with proposals to this end. Besides, I task the governments with the participation of Rosatom, VEB, and relevant commission of the State Council by August 1st this year to approve the financial, economic, and institutional model for the Trans-Arctic Transport Corridor development. Dear colleagues, today in the Russian Arctic we develop deposits of oil, natural gas, metals, other mineral resources. We will continue large-scale geological exploration here, primarily within the framework of the federal project called Geology Revival of a Legend. However, the task is to use this rich resource base in order to open in-depth processing facilities here. While preserving the unique Arctic nature, we need to come up with high value-added products in petrochemicals and gas-to-chemicals industry, in rare earth metals, and so on. One example would be a center for large-capacity marine installations facility in Belokamenka, where they localize the LNG technologies, and we use our own best practices. I would like to bring the attention of the colleagues from the government and regions. You need not only to suggest, but also to effectively fine-tune the instruments used to support investment and business activity in the Arctic. This includes tax benefits, administrative preferences, infrastructure, preparation of land, and so on. Among other things, I remind the colleagues on the need to strictly meet the plans on gas infrastructure development in the Murmansk Oblast. It should be completed before the year 2030, so this task is still on. And of course, we need to develop a very promising area such as tourism. The North, the Arctic, are a unique concentration of natural, historic, spiritual monuments. It possesses a very rich cultural mix. Annually, more than 1 million tourists visit the Arctic to get exposed to its landscapes, to see northern lights, to do some Arctic fishing and ride dog sleighs, and to travel to the polar archipelagos. The number of tourists is on the rise. Respectively, new projects spring up in this area, such as the Arctic Tourism Center, focusing on mountain skiing in Yamala-Neres Autonomous District, or hot water resort and year-round hotel complex in Karelia. I'd like to ask the federal governments and the regions to support such initiatives that open up new facets of the Arctic, and they help boost interest to this region. I also suggest that we think of including it in a federal project called 5 Seas and the Baikal Lake, the development of the touristic infrastructure at the White Sea. To open up the Arctic for the mass-scale tourism, accessibility becomes crucial, all the way from repairing and building roads to developing air transport. Let me remind you that we extended the subsidized air travel program for the Arctic cities. Last year, about 800,000 passengers availed of this opportunity. This year, the subsidized tickets are available for more than 70 routes. However, airports of the far north, especially small airports, are in need of revamping. In the coming years, within the framework of a relevant national project, we will upgrade 16 airports in the Arctic zone, including in Salikard, Arkhangelsk, Naryan-Mar, and Vorkuta. Overall, our objective is to maintain a well-developed system of airports in the Arctic, all the way from large and medium-sized airfields to small landing spots. This is also necessary to ensure the year-round accessibility of settlements and the operation of aeromedical evac units. Dear friends, a key integral goal of our plans is to improve the quality of life for people living here, to ensure modern conditions for study and work, for leisure and bringing of children in this harsh region that lures people with amazing forests. On many occasions, I talk to people, and the northerners, and both those who were born here and who came here, tell me that the north lures people, and people have their hearts chained to this land. As you may know, master plans for the Arctic zone agglomerations are ready, and they span not only major cities like Arkhangelsk and Murmansk. Master plans apply to Kirovsk, Kapatiti, and Monchegorsk in the Murmansk region, Kem and Belomorsk in Karelia, Vorkuta in the Republic of Komi, Bilibino, Pevek, and others in Chukotka, Naryan-Mar in Donetsk Autonomous Region, Salikard, Labit, Nangi, Novy Urengoy, and Noyabrsk in Donetsk Autonomous District, as well as Tiksi and Naiba in Yakutia, Norilsk, Garka, and Dikson in Krasnoyarsk territory. I would like to specifically thank the VEB Corporation and Dom.RF, who directly contributed to many of those master plans. A master plan is a comprehensive document of strategic and territorial planning. It's a long-term program of socioeconomic and spatial development for cities and settlements. We will use here state-of-the-art city planning solutions while maintaining the regional image of such settlements. And we will be guided by the suggestions of the residents and CSO, including those of indigenous peoples of the North. I'd like to remind the government that we need to accelerate the approval of the Arctic Master Plan implementation timeline. We should think about how to finance them. Also, we should think of a separate Arctic sections in our national projects and to launch a mechanism to bring in business community, strategic investors who work in the Arctic to help implement those master plans or want to work here. Also, I'd like to ask you to think about setting up a special centers of excellence where municipal and regional officials would upgrade their skills in terms of urban development. They would be exposed to the best practices in master planning. Now, we've launched the national competition on creating comfortable urban environment. The winners are eligible for budget support. Now, I suggest that we should provide additional allocation under this competition from the federal budget. We've just discussed this with the colleagues from the government and the Ministry of Finance. I will not give you the ultimate figures, but this allocation should be set up and such support should be provided so that the colleagues addressing these objectives would have more opportunities to beautify their embankments, develop their walking areas, build playing grounds, parks, and so on. And separately, I'd like to ask the government to extend the program for the military stations innovations, restricted access administrative units where our military and their families live. Such a renovation program should be active at least up until 2030 with the annual financing from the federal budget of at least 10 billion rubles. I would like to stress that this is also linked to the strengthening of our military component in this region. The strength of the military will be increasing here. One of the objectives of the master plans and renovation program is to identify where new industries and jobs would appear, including those related to the Trans-Arctic Corridor, where schools and kindergartens, polyclinics, hospitals, roads, and communication networks would be built and housing would be erected. The Ministry of Defense, together with the Ministry of Construction and regional authorities, should address all these issues facility by facility so that we understand what exactly the resources that we need and what are the timelines that are required to support this. One specific feature of Arctic is that the construction is done on permafrost. And this obviously means special requirements to design and reliability of construction. So we need to take into account the changes and potential risks. I suggest that we should set up a special permafrost monitoring center and invite leading federal and regional institutions to support this. And their research would serve as a scientific base for adaptation of technologies to the thawing of the permafrost. I know that the registry of best practices in construction in the Arctic is available, so this experience should be scaled up. I expect that the idea of Arctic multifunctional centers would also be reflected here. That is when social administrative entities, sports facilities, and services are located under one umbrella within one building. building, so to speak. And obviously, we should be guided by the opinions and demands of the citizens, people living in the north. People directly state that in the Arctic cities and settlements, they lack the so-called service economy. In other words, facilities for leisure, for family entertainment, cultural and education events, and this segment must be developed. We should encourage the entrepreneurial initiative here. We have a special program to support SMEs in the far north regions. It's important to boost its effectiveness. And I would like to ask the government to adjust the parameters of the program and also to expand the list of industries that the initiative cover. We should provide additional opportunities for small companies to bring in soft loans. I would like to say a few words separately on healthcare. Availability of healthcare in the north objectively is lower compared to the central part of Russia, especially in remote settlements. I would like to ask the government to come up with a special mechanism to finance healthcare. In order to preserve health of residents of the north, we have to employ digital technologies. We are to equip mobile culture units with AI-enabled instruments that would help remotely test human health and diagnose conditions and come up with treatment recommendations. Another sensitive issue for the Arctic and its residents is environmental well-being. Let me remind you that our first forum, which was initiated by the Russian Geographic Society, announced the so-called big cleanup of the Arctic. The idea was to clean up the Arctic from scrap metal, fuel and lubricants, residues and waste. The project launched by the Russian Geographic Society with the participation of the Ministry of Environment brought together thousands of volunteers and CSOs, and we will continue this effort. We will ensure a comprehensive preservation of the Arctic zone of Russia, including addressing of such a major issue as cleaning up of the sea districts from sunk boats and ships. Of course, money is needed for that, and I ask the government to think about it, including the issues of financing by year. We will remove technology waste and do remediation for such territories with a focus on improving the situation in cities and settlements. We will do the so-called revitalization of abandoned territories, facilities and lands. We will be thinking about their reuse for the benefit of residents of the Arctic cities. In fact, we pay our dues to the Arctic, but we may not pile up new debts with respect to its unique nature. Taking into account the plans for economic development of the region, it's important to strike a balance between using natural riches and environmental preservation. In order to test new environmentally efficient technologies in the polar Ural and the Molinets Autonomous District, we plan to set up a scientific and educational station, Snezhinka, Snowflake, by the end of 2028. Here, an international team of researchers and academics would test green technologies for the Arctic in the field. They would think about their application for livelihoods, telecoms, medicine, and industry of new materials. Dear colleagues, the Arctic is a territory of tremendous opportunities for specialists in any profession, for entrepreneurs, for the youth, for families who have lived here for generations or who moved here recently and plan to settle here to buy or build their own home. We have extended the Arctic mortgages program by 2030. The mortgages are provided at 2% per annum. We came up with softer conditions for borrowers, say teachers and healthcare professionals, are relieved from the length of service requirements. Now, the participants of the special military operation and employees of the military-industrial complex are also eligible for this program. Now, dilapidated housing is another major issue for Northerners, and I would like to ask the government to come up with a plan to address this issue by September 1st, and this plan should span at least 10 years. As you may be aware, we launched the affordable rental housing program in the Far East. Young people who come to the Far Eastern regions, who are graduate universities there, can find jobs there and rent apartments at fairly low cost, and the rental payments are subsidized from the regional and federal budgets. I suggest that we extend this program to the key settlements in the Arctic so that rental housing becomes more affordable for those who only start their work career in the regions, for those who can live and work here and would love to do this. The program should become effective in the Arctic already on January 1st, 2026. We also agreed to extend the Murmansk managerial personnel training program for the Arctic regions. This has been accomplished already. I'm confident that such a training should give a powerful start for many promising leaders, and this would benefit both the Arctic and the entire country. One more thing. The North has always been a magnet for bold people, true leaders. One of such devotees, enthusiasts, is the renowned researcher, polar explorer Artur Chilingarov, and I suggest in his memory to set up special grants targeted to support young initiatives within the framework of environmental, educational, and scientific projects in the Arctic. Dear friends, development of the Russian North, overcoming the challenges posed by the harsh nature and reaching new promising frontiers, well, this is something that inspired many generations of our ancestors. Seafarers and Novgorod merchants of the medieval times, explorers of the Arctic of the 16th and 17th centuries, industrialists of the 18th and 19th centuries, scientists, polar explorers, engineers, workers of the Soviet Union, and companies of the modern Russia who launched major Arctic projects in the beginning of the 2000s. And today, North is at the fore of development. It is our sovereign historical choice, which means that the goals that we set and address in the Arctic, the projects that we implement here, should be commensurate, historic scale, to span decades and perhaps even centuries. We will do whatever it takes to strengthen global leadership of Russia in the Arctic. And despite all the current challenges and difficulties, we will ensure a comprehensive development of the region. We will create a solid foundation for future generations. Thank you very much.